From Elliot Ness to Robert Kennedy, America has a long history of crusaders against organized crime. But one name is far less known. Back in the 1930s, Eunice Carter, a granddaughter of slaves, became New York's first African-American assistant district attorney. And she's credited with helping take down Lucky Luciano, one of America's most notorious mob bosses. It's just one of the fascinating stories told in a new biography of Carter. Invisible was in fact written by her grandson, Yale law professor Stephen L. Carter.
I want to tell an American story, a story about hope and a story about overcoming adversity, whatever the odds. And that's certainly the story of my grandmother's life.
Stephen L. Carter's grandmother was Eunice Hurston Carter, a prominent black activist, community leader, and attorney who made her mark decades before desegregation.
It's still here.
As Carter told us at the historic Morris Jamel Mansion in Harlem, just across the street from his Nana's home. And this was their house?
This was their house, number 10.
A woman so famous in her day, she counted Mary McLeod Bethune and Eleanor Roosevelt as friends.
I need you to pull all the prostitution cases north of 110th Street.
The real-life prosecutor even inspired a character on HBO's Boardwalk Empire.
I'm sorry, okay, I don't make the assignments.
Online comment threads swiftly filled with mockery. Ridiculous. Anachronistic. That there weren't black lawyers back then, not black women lawyers anyway, but they were wrong. My Nana Eunice was real and really did prosecute mobsters.
There's a detective in New York, Mr. Mayor, who I think is one of the best detectives in the United States.
In the 1930s, Thomas Dewey was appointed special prosecutor to take on the mafia in New York City. He hired 20 lawyers, 19 white men, and Eunice Hurston Carter.
They're all working on loan sharking and kidnapping and murder and numbers running. But Eunice is a woman, so they give her prostitution. So Eunice, alone in this office, listens to the citizen complaints, begins to do research.
By 1936, she found evidence linking organized crime to Charles Lucky Luciano, the most powerful mafia boss in America.
She's able to go to Dewey and say, I found the evidence that the mob is running this. And he allows Eunice to basically run this big raid where they're going to raid 80 brothels at the same time. And she was able to prove that Luciano and the mob did take a cut of money for prostitution. She was the only assistant in Dewey's office who ever connected Luciano with any crime.
Eunice's story began in Atlanta, where race riots left a lasting impact.
When she was 7 years old, Eunice's home life was completely destroyed by the Great Atlanta Riot of 1906, where white mobs swarmed into the black neighborhoods to burn and to kill. She was shaped by that experience, and a year after the riot, Eunice said to a little kid she met, she said when she grew up, she was going to be a lawyer and put the bad people in jail.
Her parents were intellectuals and activists. They raised Eunice and her brother to believe that with determination, anything could be achieved. They lived an incredible life for African-American people in their time.
I try to imagine it myself sometimes. Here's my grandmother, the grandchild of slaves, who has these two parents who are these big black activists. One of them is traveling the world on behalf of the YMCA. The other is her mother is this NAACP activist who gets sent into places where the people have been completely intimidated by the Ku Klux Klan, and she's all by herself supposed to rouse the black community back into action.
With the Dewey headquarters buzzing,
Eunice would rise to importance in the Republican Party, playing a role in Thomas Dewey's presidential bids in 1944 and 1948.
His party adopted the strongest civil rights platform ever adopted by a major party up to that time, largely through Eunice's efforts. And when he was on the stump, he talked about Eunice.
Despite her hard work, some things remained out of reach.
She wanted to be a judge. That was really an ambition of hers, and she thought, as a good Republican who campaigned for the right candidates, that would happen one day. It never did. Interestingly, Eunice didn't blame race. She didn't blame gender. She blamed her brother.
Alpheus Hunton, 4 years her junior, spoke several languages, held degrees from Harvard, NYU, and taught English at his alma mater, Howard University. But he was an outspoken communist. In 1951, Hunton went to prison for refusing to name names to the House Un-American Activities Committee. When he was released 6 months later, Paul Robeson and W.E.B. Du Bois were there to greet him, but not his sister.
Toward the end of their lives, they reconciled a little bit, but they never saw each other again before they died.
Oh, so sad.
It's a very sad story, and it's a reminder of what can happen when we allow our politics to divide us from each other, that I can't get along with you because of our sharp political differences. We should work on that, you and I.
Invisible was truly a family affair. Leah Carter, Stephen L. Carter's daughter, was key in researching the book.
And unfortunately, the world has always been unjust, but there is also always something that can be done.
One of the things that's exciting to me about telling Eunice's story is that it fits in with something I think we need in these times. Be reminded that against much bigger odds, there are people who did manage to break through. I'm not suggesting there aren't barriers today that are real, but I think that the more we study about people who broke through the barriers of those days, the more hope we have, I think, for the future now.
The interesting thing about Eunice was that she was a writer at first, and in fact was one of the first women, she and Zora Neale Hurston, to be inducted in Harlem's Writers Guild, which was like really amazing. And then she said, no, I really want to make a change in the way the laws are impacted. So that's why she entered the law.
What a fascinating woman, and that the break with her brother was a real twist in that story.
It's a great read. I encourage everyone to go out and buy it because it tells you all about New York history, all about Southern Atlanta, Georgia history, and it really is a romp through a who's who of the Harlem Renaissance.